Hi everybody!
So, what happens when you take a world-renowned doctor and turn him into a farmer?
Steve Collins, we were chatting to him on his farm in West Cork, and he is just such an amazing human. He saved more than 1 million lives from hunger and starvation.
Yeah, and he has battled the WHO, he's fought against all of the major kind of global pharma, big ag bodies to help to, you know, bring food to like starving populations in West Africa, essentially.
And now he has taken all his information, all his knowledge that he's gathered over the years about nutrition and phytonutrients and nutrient-rich foods, and he started growing blueberries and berries on his farm in West Cork, and he has discovered that there might even be a secret cure for...
Don't say it.
We won't say it.
Bleep.
Listen in and you'll find out.
Yeah, so if you want to hear about why polyphenols are good for your health, and like this guy knows the book on why polyphenols, those colourful pigments in our foods, are going to save our lives, and why they're the most important, essentially, nutrient in our diet that isn't even classed as a nutrient yet. Tune in and come in with us as we take a beautiful wander down to the wilds of West Cork.
So please help us support our journey by liking and subscribing, and comment below and let us know if you have any topics you want us to talk on, or if you have any thoughts about this one, or any questions you want us to pass on to Dr. Steve.
And thanks to our fantastic sponsor, Clear Light Saunas. When you are ready, and make it now, to come and invest in a fantastic infrared sauna to be your health insurance policy to keep you going for the decades, as I have. Come and chat to us, we'll get you the discount codes and we'll help you put some infrared in your life.
And for now, get ready to dive into probably the most important chat you'll hear in a long time.
Enjoy.
I'm very interested in phytonutrients. You know,
yeah.
They
really are. That's what we talk about all the time.
Yeah. No, yeah. To me, that is such an easy win in terms of improving health. The power of phytonutrients in health, it's the more they look at it, the more it's becoming increasingly apparent that they have a huge effect. You know, you look at blood pressure, glucose, fats. There's human data on dementia. Aronia juice slowing the cognitive decline. The whole cytokine cascade for COVID. The aronia berries block it in 3 places: interleukin 6, 8, and human necrosis factor. They block the action of those. So, so they would actually have a in theory, now this hasn't been shown in practice, but in theory they would have a great damping down effect on that cytokine cascade. There's human data showing that aronia juice kills coronavirus very effectively. That's human data on that. Using it as a mouthwash.
No way.
Yeah, it wasn't quite as good as sort of not Listerine. What are what's that?
Some other alcohol-based thing.
Yeah, and those ones that actually have antiseptic in it.
Oh yeah,
but it was really quite effective. You know.
Wow.
A major reduction. So I got the aronia juice from here analysed in a phytonutrient laboratory in Parma in Italy. Real experts. There were 48 different polyphenols, and there was nearly 4,000 milligrams per litre. So it's way off the scale. Compared to blueberries, their phytonutrient content probably about 5 times higher. You know, a lot of the anthocyanins are in the pigment. Yeah. And it's incredibly pigmented. You know, I've been sort of trying to make different products, and I was making some aronia kombucha.
Oh, cool.
Unfortunately, I made one a bit too lively, and you know the room back there. And I opened it, I covered the ceiling. Well,
amazing.
Here's the aronia here. Look, so you can see that this is just a few I just put in because I didn't want to monocrop the blueberries. So this isn't the main lot, but the if you look at inside them, the flesh. Compare that with a blueberry.
Yeah, this will be fun.
So that's the aronia. And that's the blueberry.
Totally different thing, isn't it?
See, so the blueberry has got a lot of anthocyanin in the skin.
Yeah, but in the flesh.
But in the flesh, very little. And actually, there's data showing that you have more anthocyanin from the pressing cake left over after the juice manufacture from things like blueberries or cranberries than you do in the juice. But with aronia, I mean, you know, the juice is really highly pigmented, and then when you get to the skin. So we got experiments going on at the moment with Shannon to look at how best to extract them. So what we're thinking is probably sell a juice, which I was shown 4,000 milligrams in a litre. That's pretty good. So like you're talking, most people have an intake, I think, of roughly 400 milligrams, 500 milligrams a day. If you can get to 800, then that's what the experts in Parma were recommending. My initial degree was anthropology and philosophy. Then I did medical doctoring, and then I've got a PhD in, well, a clinical PhD, it's called an MD in nutrition, and then another one in a doctorate of science.
Wow. Oh my God, you're just the right person for doing this.
Yeah, you sort of fall into what you, I don't know. Yeah, history seems to be pushing me in this direction for some reason.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because like Finn runs a health food store, and we do like talks about movement, nutrition, breath work, meditation, combining the whole thing to try and like, how can we look at health in a way that isn't like throttled into tiny compartmentalized things. And what you find is that so many of the amazing products, the people who are making them aren't necessarily the people who know all the really interesting nutrition stuff. They just have gone like, what will I produce?
Let's just try something. Yeah, which is great.
And so it's really exciting when you find someone who like
actually knows the stuff.
Well, don't overbig it. Don't big it up too much. You know, but my specialty is treating children on the point of death or starvation. Okay. So I've done 35 years of working in famines and wars. Okay. So I know a bit about that after 35 years. But this phytonutrients is all quite new to me. But the basic principles of how nutrition and metabolism interplay, you know, that gives you a sort of feel for it. But the thing that struck me starting to look into phytonutrients is how incredibly complicated it is. Yeah. You know, it's like, I suppose, you know, I could easily think I could have spent my whole life studying phytonutrients and still really be scratching the surface. Yeah. You know, they are such profound metabolic pathways these things are interacting in. And they're interacting in so many different places. And it's like in that juice, there's 48 different ones. Yeah. So, you know, you've got, when you think of how many metabolic niches they have, how many different polyphenols there are, you times that together, you know, you've got whatever, it's a very big number.
Infinite, because they say there's something like, what is it, the plant chemicals we've discovered, something like 6,000. They predict there might be 26,000 different. I'm sure it's more than that. That's probably a fairly
I can imagine it. Yeah,
it's amazing. And so, like with polyphenols, it's the issue that in most situations, the most interesting research for me around polyphenols is that is its influence on our microbiome, which is then influencing ourselves. So it's like this secondary thing, right?
Yeah, but that's the polyphenols and the fibre. And
yes, of course, that combination, Yeah,
that for sure. And I mean, the microbiome, you know, it's such profound. It's interesting. I sort of occasionally, when I have things to say, I go to the Global Conference of Nutrition, the IUNS thing, and it happens every 4 years. And I had something to say in 2012, so I went then. Didn't have anything to say was it 2012? Maybe 2010, but 4 years later, didn't have anything to say. And then 4 years after that, had something to say. So I went twice with a 4 year back, so 8 years. When I first went, it was the Thailand one. I don't think there was even a talk on the microbiome. And the next time, 8 years later, at least a third of it was the microbiome. You know, they've discovered a new organ, basically.
Yeah,
literally. You know, they've been doing medicine without knowing about the heart. So it's very, very profound.
Yeah, isn't it? It's amazing. And like, even now you hear, like, they talk about the metabolome, that, like, you know, we've got like a genome that's described to our mitochondria on their own. There's so many bits, even in the last, like, I don't know, like 5 or 10 years, that, like, we're only finding out, like, where even like our favorite like nerve pathway, the vagus, we're only finding out where it ends now. You know, like all these sorts of amazing things that you kind of assume. I think as a layperson, I assumed anyway, that a lot of this was ironed out. Like when you saw anatomy and physiology charts, you kind of like, this has been discovered, and we're so little conclusion.
Well, when we did I was in North Korea in '98 teaching people there how to treat starvation. And I was going around all these baby homes, and these were homes that were very high status for the children, orphans of the martyrs of the revolution. And so what had happened, as the economy had broken, these things had become really financially stretched, so they were bad condition. But people, because they had high status, still, if they were too poor to look after their kids, or if someone died and they had orphans, they put them in these homes. So the conditions were really shitty. You know, I wasn't allowed to see too much, but if I used to nip through a door where I wasn't meant to be, I would find children literally dying. Everyone had nappy rash. It was really grim. Until I went to one, same grim, very low staffing, but I couldn't find a single nappy rash. And they were actually all looked quite healthy. And I spent hours, you know, next door to a yogurt factory, and they were giving them a bit of yogurt every day. And so then that made me think, whoa. And so we then did a study on with therapeutic food, adding in 4 different probiotics and 4 prebiotics. And we reduced mortality significantly in the recovery phase.
Wow.
Yeah. But that was about, God, it was 2009 we did, or 8 we did it. And it was about 1,500 kids. And it was, I think, one of the biggest studies ever on probiotics and the sort of microbiome at that point. But now, you know,
very much an offshoot at the time as well. It wasn't like designed to focus on.
No. But it was just that these, you know, the probiotics. I hadn't even heard of the microbiome at that stage. But I saw from the yogurt probiotics were having an impact. So I thought, well, let's see if we can replicate that in a little powder easily. Yeah.
So, and did you, like, at that stage where your nutrition, like when you were dealing with like infants who were starving, where was your nutrition knowledge at? Like when, like as somebody who's in the medical profession, because we conventionally see, and not routinely, less and less routinely, but we tend to see a lot of adversity still when it comes to the medical profession and their willingness to embrace the idea of diet as an intervention in and of itself, as opposed to just like, go and do that as well if you want.
I'd learned almost no nutrition in medical college. A little bit about obesity, because that was in St Bartholomew's in London. That's, you know, they were seeing more obesity. They didn't see any starvation. We had one lecture on kwashiorkor and marasmus. That was it.
Okay.
But I'd travelled for 2 years before college, so I knew I'd done medicine to work abroad. And so then in my holidays, I would go and get holiday jobs in Africa. And I actually got stuck in Africa in 85, I got caught in the war and I just didn't go back for a year. And I travelled all around and then got caught up in the famine of the 84 to 86 famine in the Sahel.
Wow.
I was in the Sudan, Darfur bit.
Jesus.
Not in the Ethiopia bit. But then, so I had exposure. And so that made me more interested. I'd reading about it, but no, I hadn't actually formally been taught.
At that stage, it was like Plumpy-Nut, etc. was the kind of thing.
There.
I wasn't even there yet, was it?
Oh God, no. So that's my speciality. So Plumpy-Nut was invented in 1996. It was first started to be used in a tiny bit in 1998.
Is it that late? Wow.
Yeah, but that's what that was why I got certain awards or whatever, because I developed the delivery mechanism for Plumpy-Nut globally.
You're kidding me?
Yeah, to treat people.
This is weird talking to the person. That's weird.
Yeah, so the community-based management of acute malnutrition, we called it CTC, Community-Based Therapeutic Care originally.
Wow, okay.
But it was taken on by the UN in 2005. So I had seen it was 1998 when I was in South Sudan, this terrible famine. And I was actually doing I'd set up some centres for concern, and then I was doing an evaluation for Médecins Sans Frontières, and I'd seen them trying to implement inpatient care, and they were really good teams. They had this cookbook, the little blue MSF book, really good book. They were implementing it, and they had actually had people crushed to death in queues trying to get in this thing. You know, it was a disaster. Yeah. And I just realised this can't work. You know, you cannot make a model that has supposedly therapeutic feeding centres only had 100, space for 100, then you had to replicate them with all the logistics on the staff that meant. If you were addressing a situation that had 30,000 starving kids, you know, you're not going to get that to work. And so you have to bite the bullet and say, look, I'm sorry, the world has let you down, you people. We're going to have to treat the majority in their homes. Because we can't, if we're so focused on the minority, the majority can't help at all. And so I developed this community-based therapeutic care model in the evaluation, and that was using Plumpy-Nut, because I'd come across it. It was the first time I think it'd probably been used, as I say, from 1996 it was first developed. Yeah. And I was using that as a take-home ration. Now, I wasn't allowed to test it. This was just an idea. I wasn't allowed to test it because the standard of care was inpatient, and you had a 30% mortality rate in hospitals treating starvation.
30%? Oh, that's
20
tough
to
to work with.
30%. It hadn't changed for 20, 30 years.
Jesus.
Now, the NGOs were getting 10% mortality rate.
Okay.
But they were with doctors, nurses, high input. And there was I saying, no, what you should do is leave them at home, give them some of that food, and let the mothers treat them. See, so that, all the medics were saying, you can't do that because it's unethical. You know, we're getting a 10% mortality rate with doctors and nurses. You're saying let the mothers treat it. Yeah. But what they hadn't realised was that they were a victim of their own model, in that malnutrition, don't just get malnutrition. Oh, suddenly I'm starving. You get it a little bit, you get malnourished, you get a diarrhoea, you get poor weaning practices, you get, you know, and then you get thinner, your immune system starts to go down, so you get more infected. That means you lose more nutrients through infection, through diarrhea. You have greater nutrient requirement because you've got to try and fight infection. So then you haven't got the nutrients, so you go down, 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 down. We were catching them down here when they're on the point of death from starvation. But if you catch them early, they're easy to treat. And so I wasn't allowed to test it. Like, everyone was blocking me until Ethiopia in 2000. They had feeding centres, therapeutic feeding centres, since the '84 famine, and they realised they didn't work. They couldn't get rid of them, so they actually said to agencies, "You're not allowed to set up inpatient centres."
Wow.
So I was working with Oxfam, and then I worked with Concern, and we set up 2 programmes using this new model, and one of them with this lady called Kate Sadler, I worked with for 15 years. She was there, and she took down the data really carefully, and it was only a small data set, 300 odd children, but we showed that we had actually got way lower mortality than they were getting in centres because we were catching people early, and that gave me the space. And then I started this company, Valid International, to have a platform to generate the data, and then I took it to Malawi, and Malawi gave me a district, then 2 districts, then we went to Ethiopia again, and then within 5 years UN policy had changed.
Wow.
So it was quite a ride.
That's a big old deal.
Yeah,
I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the fallout from what you've done has been huge. I know. Listen, I mean, like, I know
it's been blocked.
Okay, really?
So, yeah. So they've medicalised the model, and they call it CMAM, or they don't even call it CTC. So the model had lots of elements. It had local production of these foods using locally grown ingredients, so that you would strengthen
the indigenous
food security,
economy,
and you would add value to local crops. You'd improve smallholder farming, and then you would improve local food processing. So that would strengthen and help to prevent. The UN cut that out when they adopted the model. They medicalised the model, and it became very much. It shouldn't be, but it's, despite all the stuff we said, it's the community engagements that's the first thing. It came off and just pushed Plumpy-Nut off the back of a truck.
Wow.
Imported Plumpy-Nut, and so
that's why I've heard bad things about Plumpy-Nut, essentially, is because of that mismanagement of the policy around how it was never
the food itself is great.
Yeah.
It's got 32 different nutrients in the right balance. The nutrients are attached to energy, so you can't overdose, because you think a lot of nutrients are quite poisonous. Vitamin A, for example, it's quite toxic. But if you gave it as a pill, you could, some kid might, but when you give it in a food matrix, that's a high lipid food matrix, you've attached the nutrients to the energy, and
that means satiety happens,
exactly,
and then you're
self-limiting.
Yeah.
So that's so totally safe.
Yeah, okay.
And as long as the child got appetite, but then again, you look at how they did with appetite. You can tell if a child's got appetite by asking the mum.
Oh.
But they've developed all these things. You have to weigh the dose and weigh the child. It's like, ask the mum.
Yeah.
So they overcomplicated, over-medicalised it, and that meant they centralised it more. Whereas, it was called community-based management for a reason, because it was based in the community. Whereas they've made it an extension model coming from centres into the community.
Yeah,
and then it's like so disempowering for the mothers as well.
Exactly.
Like, the best care for the child is always going to come from the mother.
Yeah.
And them feeling confident, and then teaching their neighbours, and the whole thing just becoming this beautiful synergy.
Exactly. And we did follow-up studies. So the original studies where they were treating children in therapeutic feeding centres, they had 50% relapse rate, if not more. We did follow-up studies of community-based programs that we were designing that were done well and empowering mothers, and we had about a 2% relapse rate. And in fact, the mortality rate of the children we discharged from our program was less than the mortality rate in the base background population,
and because
mothers didn't work.
Yeah, and you can imagine the offshoots from that mother, like within her community, being seen.
Because they may be poorly educated, but they're not stupid.
No, yeah, exactly. They don't know how to live. They don't know how to survive. They're humans,
and so a lot of what we do was mother to mother. Or actually, you have to include the fathers, because in a lot of cultures, even though the mother cares for the child, the father makes decisions about access to food, about access to resources, whatever. But we also, I set up a charity, Valid Nutrients, an Irish charity, to make these things locally, and we had a 15-year research program. See, the problem with the Plumpy-Nut recipe is 30% of the ingredients are milk, and milk is always imported into Africa. I think there's one small spray dry plant in South Africa now, but essentially it's always imported.
For the whole continent?
Yeah.
That's bonkers.
Yeah.
I mean, they have loads of, they have camels, they have lots of other versions of milk that isn't just cow milk.
No processing for them.
Oh, wow.
But once you've got a milk-based product, you depend on imports.
Yeah.
So we did but it's difficult to make children recover and thrive without milk, because young children are designed to have milk. And so we had a 15-year research program, and lots of trials, animal studies, 3 big randomized controlled trials, and finally we succeeded in getting a plant-based product to work actually better than the milk-based product. We had to add crystalline amino acids, which is analogous to the food industry or animal feed industry, where all chickens and pigs, you had to have crystalline amino acids to bump up the protein quality. But we got this product to work, and we published a large randomized controlled trial, 3-arm, 1,500 quid trial in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition.
Wow, okay.
In 2017.
That's big.
Big, yeah. It's been blocked. It's been blocked. The WHO organised a sham review. I don't know why. That's a question for them. So they took our 3 studies. The last one, we had completely changed the product by adding amino acids, and they homogenized and pooled the data with the first 2 that didn't work.
With a meta-analysis that just dilutes the whole thing.
And then they came to conclusion. So 2 of our studies didn't work, but then we had evolved the product and changed it completely and got a product that worked. They mixed all that together and said, oh, it doesn't work. And then they didn't even commission the cost effectiveness study. They were asked by a journalist, why didn't you do it? And they said, oh, well, we knew that the rate of weight gain was lower, so we didn't bother to commission the... So they prejudged the review, and the rate of weight gain is the only parameter that the plant-based amino acid enhanced recipe is lower on, 8% lower. But the treatment of anemia is way superior, because we know if you get anemic and you go to the doctor, they say, don't take your iron tablets with a glass of milk, because milk blocks iron absorption. We know that. That is a primary health outcome. It's the commonest nutrition deficiency in the world, and it's, you don't want your child anemic. Yeah. Whereas the rate of gain, over 8% longer,
no biggie.
No biggie. Yeah. It's a bit more expensive. But if you actually did the cost effectiveness analysis, you see, okay, instead of being 50% cheaper, it's 35% cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
grand.
Still a lot cheaper.
So loads cheaper.
Which give you a dimension of that. With 4.5 million children treated, if you reduce the cost by 25%, you treat 1 million children more at no cost. What? And that saves between 50 and 100,000 lives, depending on the mortality rate you choose, but roughly 50 to 100,000 child lives per year at no cost. And the WHO didn't conduct that review. Now, you have to ask them why. I can guess some reasons. Yeah. We know there's big lobbies. Yeah. We know dairy lobby's strong. We know the IETF producers lobby is strong. But it's criminal.
Yeah, actually criminal. I'm glad you're saying the words I was going to...
After 15 years, we are a tiny charity. We've got no resources. And so, yeah, I'm at the end of my tether. There's nothing more I can do. President Clinton's foreign policy advisor wrote to the head of governance for the WHO, and they didn't even bother to reply. They wrote to it about it. Bertie Ahern wrote to the head of WHO twice. They didn't. They had a sham reply. Wow. There's funny things played. I think there's a lot of controls, especially in the humanitarian industry, in that you have a lot of NGOs or the UN that are ostensibly set up to benefit their clientele. Yeah. But what happens actually, they exist and they raise money by being seen to do good, not actually doing good. And a lot of it becomes a battle for control, resources. You can't get on a flight without UNICEF telling you how great they are. And I've had programs that have been deliberately undermined by UNICEF because UNICEF's name weren't on them. And so I think a lot of it's about control of resources, unfortunately, and they don't like maverick disruptors like myself and Valid, and hence we've been marginalised. Wow. So now I'm gonna just change things here,
dude. So when did you make the decision? Like that's been something you're still been working on that up until very recently. It's 2017. You're saying that study was.
I still volunteer for the charity. I was working on it today.
Okay.
I'm not going to give up. They're not going to win.
Okay, good.
Ultimately, they can't. Well, in fact, they can't. I mean, ultimately, how can they possibly block something that can have that much impact? And so in the end, they will fail. And the problem is, the longer it takes for them to fail to block it, Yeah, that's the problem.